Hey my tech friends, thanks for stopping by. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already. Let's continue to grow this channel. Hope you guys enjoy this video. Hey guys, welcome to a Ghost Spectre 1022H2 video. So in today's video we're going to attempt to fix our security issues. Now if you haven't checked out the other video for X-Lite, it's in the description. If you haven't checked out the vanilla version of Windows 10 configuration, please check the description. All of those videos, this video and those other two videos, are all combined in some way, shape, or form to how we got to this point where we are actually locking down and fixing these operating systems. So figured with this video we'd start a little different today, and we'd start with actually looking at our Nessus scan for our Windows 10 22H2 Ghost 10 operating system, which was 38 infos and 1 medium. Now, this is a comparable operating system if we compare it to our Windows 10 out-of-the-box configuration with 24 infos. So we'll note that this operating system is far worse when it comes to security than your Windows 11 vanilla system is out of the box. It's not as small as the X-Lite system, so it doesn't really offer you the additional storage savings. And I'll be honest, in our last video with this operating system, it was a little buggy and it didn't really feel finished. Now, that could be that this 22H2 is somebody else's build on top of the original 20H2 version, and that something's a little off in the configuration, which is totally possible, but it felt very beta in comparison to the 20H2 version of the Ghost 10 operating system. So with all that said, I really wanted to jump into the system and see if we could fix this 38 info issue, see if we could fix the 1 medium vulnerability issue, and see if we could resolve these problems. Now, in a previous video that I started to work through, which was for Windows 10 scripting, to actually script some of these issues out of the operating system, I've gone above and beyond at this point and added the X-Lite configuration scripts to the vanilla Windows 10 scripts. And I'm planning on adding the Ghost 10 scripts to the X-Lite to the Windows vanilla scripts. So that way we could run a script, ignore the errors that take place, and have the configuration be basically the same on all three operating systems from a security standpoint. So let's continue on and jump into our Ghost Spectre 10 22H2 system and see if we could fix that operating system and get rid of these security issues. Stay tuned. Okay, so right off the bat, this particular operating system is better than our X-Lite system was, because when we set up the initial installation process, we were prompted to create a username and a password. So we already have an account that has a username and password. So the only thing you really need to do in this operating system is to go through every single one of these accounts and make sure you don't have password never expires is set, because that will add to the security of the operating system. Now, something that most people don't realize is that if you have that checkbox checked, there's a registry key that corresponds with that. And if you're somebody that's trying to hack into a system, you could see that registry key through a scan. You could see whether or not that password's value is set to never expire. And if it's set to never expire, you could basically use a password cracking utility to your heart's content forever and never have to worry about the password expiring. So you don't have to beat the clock, because you know that password's not going to expire. And the end user, since Microsoft Windows really has no denial of service, DOS attack, or penetration alerting software on it, you'll never know. And eventually they'll get in. Okay, so moving on. We have our accounts configured. That's one bonus to this operating system. Let's take a look now at our firewall configuration. So what I've done is I've created scripts over the past couple days. You'll see variable days in here for the configuration times. And what we need to do is we need to find the firewall configuration. So we're going to edit this real quick so we can open up PowerShell. Great. So what we're going to do is we are going to do an output of the original file and execute this. Okay, so that's actually a really good thing that we just saw here, which is that the system has scripting disabled, which means that this system also has the additional function of disabling PowerShell scripts, which is something the X-Lite system didn't have. Now, again, this is preference to me. It doesn't really make any difference, because if you're in the operating system and you want to run scripts, you should be allowed to run scripts. So what we're going to do is we're just going to set the execution policy to use remote signed for the current scope of the current user, so me. And I'm just going to execute this. I'm going to choose yes to all, and now the scripting privilege is re-enabled on the actual operating system. So let's go back to our firewall script here, and let's execute this. Okay, so right off the bat, our error message that was on this other screen here is caused because UAC is blocking us from running the actual script, which is interesting because according to the configuration on the system, UAC is disabled, but UAC is not disabled. So something's broken in the registry for our UAC controls on the Ghost 10 system. So what we've done at this point is we've run the executable to actually output the text file for our configuration. So let's jump back to Tools, and let's take a look at our firewall rules. So the way I have this set right now is that it's only going to show things that are enabled and true. And there's going to be a lot of information in here. These are all the firewall rules that are currently set to allowed through the firewall of this actual Windows operating system. Now what I'm going to do is actually going to execute the script that we wrote for our configuration on our X-Lite system. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to modify that script and add anything that we may need back to it in order to block or drop out additional connections which aren't necessary on this operating system. So if we go back to our tools folder here, what we're going to want to do is just take a look here and remember the 351 kilobytes for size versus all the information in there. And the next thing we're going to want to do is we're going to create a new tab, and we're going to go back into our non-admin thing here. Grab our configuration here, and we're going to change this one to new. Great. So now once we fix or run our fix, we should be able to then go back in here and run the new to do a size comparison between the original firewall output and the new firewall output. Okay, so we have our firewall configuration now added here, and these are all the firewall settings that I have found between the X-Lite system and the Windows Vanilla Edition once you start removing service structure from the operating system. So basically this disables all the crap that doesn't need to be enabled, all the stuff that does the broadcast, all the stuff that does the listening for all the advertising garbage, and everything that's just an add-on or a function of the Windows operating system that's not necessary to run the Windows operating system. Now I know for a fact that adding these particular stops into the firewall secures the firewall down to the point that the only things that Nessus sees through the firewall are the things that are necessary to run Windows. And as far as I could tell, it doesn't block your ability or function from using it on the internet. Now that said, it may block certain things from working. Like if you, for instance, want to use casting or you want to do Bluetooth sharing between laptops, this is definitely going to stop that ability to do that. But you could always run the netsh command and actually just disable the firewall to allow that temporarily through without adding the additional rules. So let's run this and see what we get as far as our output is concerned inside of our configuration. Now we're going to get error messages here. This is going to be normal. This is just going to be part of the process. I expect to get error messages. There's not going to be a one-to-one copy exact between two different operating systems. Unfortunately, the X-Lite renamed all their service structure. The Windows Vanilla version has the name of the service structure different than the Windows X-Lite does. So the firewall names corresponding to ports are different in the vanilla version than they are in the X-Lite version. And if they're different in this operating system than they are in the X-Lite and the vanilla version, I'll have to add that as well to the script. So it'll fail for the X-Lite or it'll fail for the vanilla, but it won't fail for both because obviously one of those two is going to exist in the operating system. Or at least that's the theory. However, if that's not the case, then we'll have to just dip back and actually fix the script so that way the Ghost Scepter system also gets the firewall configuration changes. Okay, so we finished, and I ran the get firewall configuration change script so that way we could see our enabled firewall settings. And here's the original at 351 kilobytes, and the new one is at 158 kilobytes. Now I'll have to go through this to see specifically what still exists in here and if there's anything else that needs to be dropped out of here. So far, everything looks like stuff that should be in here. I don't see anything yet that's out of what's required to run the Windows operating system with the firewall turned on. Because again, the idea of a firewall with a whole bunch of rules that are unnecessary turned on basically creates a Swiss cheese effect where you can just stare through a different hole and access the system, which honestly just pretty pointless at that point. So in looking at this, everything looks good so far. Let me go through the rest of this, and then what I'll do is I will kick off at our next part. Okay, guys, so I reviewed the rest of the firewall configuration, and I had to add to this thing. So I've added about 4 or 5 additional rules to our firewall configuration and found some kind of bizarre stuff on this operating system, but let's get this run first. So specifically what I found is that we had wireless beaming turned on. So in other words, the Miracast service was enabled on our Ghost Spectre system, which allows you to mirror your wireless connection between your laptop or your desktop to other devices, basically turning your wireless device into a router. And I also found that the password or user access controls for that particular process were disabled. So it allowed you to become a wireless broadcaster to your wireless network in an open configuration with no password required. I'm not entirely sure why it was configured or on there, because that's not something that's set up default on Windows 10. So that's something that would have had to be added to this actual package in order for that to happen. But that doesn't exist on our 20H2 system. So something's up here with this operating system. Okay, so we just ran our firewall output again, but this time we just changed the name to redo. So we have the 3 actual configurations. So we're down to 148 from the 158, so we reduced by the addition of those, or subtraction of those additional 6 services. So at this point, firewall's fixed on our Ghost Spectre system. Let's move on to a different requirement on here. Let's go into our next steps here. Let's disable our DISM configuration. So there's additional services and stuff that we're running on our X-Lite system. Let's take a look to see if those services exist on this system. And if they do, let's kill them. And basically what they are things that we don't need for our operating system to function. So let's first run our DISM command to actually see what we have configured on this particular system. Now, what this is basically the add remove Windows components. It tells us what components are installed on our Spectre system. So let's run this. Let's jump back to tools, and now we should have a feature data log. There we go. So in here we can see whether or not the state is disabled or enabled. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a Control F and find enabled. So we have the WFC services enabled. We have port sharing enabled. Something to just keep in mind is that's not what you think it is. It's not like port sharing as if you're sharing the port nefariously with another application. It's to allow applications to control a port through .NET framework generally. So that's nothing to be alarmed about. That's normal. Media playback is normal. Windows Media Player is normal. SMB Direct, that's not something that typically I would say should be enabled, but we'll have a script at some point in our configuration to disable the SMB1 protocol, so that will likely go away. Our printing services, again, this is probably not designed to be a daily driver print service, print configuration, so in our configuration we'll have the printing services disabled as well. Our work client folders, printing, there's .NET framework, so like SMB1 protocol, this should not be enabled. Not on Windows 10, that's a bad idea. In Windows XP, this is really what's required to communicate. So if you have an XP machine on your network, then obviously you want to leave the SMB1 turned on. However, it creates a giant security risk on a Windows 10 or a Windows 11 system, because generally speaking, those are the systems that you're going to find in a network where people actually do want access to. And if they have access to it, then they have access to the, basically have keys to the castle. It's not a good idea to enable that unless you turn on the signing for SMB1, so that way you don't allow non-authenticated connections into the system. But that's off by default. So that's just something to keep in mind. So if we continue to look here, Internet Explorer is enabled, which we will disable that. And that's about it. There's nothing else in here. All right, so that's relatively good news. We don't have too much in here. All right, so let's go back to our configuration here, into our scripts, and specifically look for our fix the features script. So right here, to edit. So in our configuration now, we have our DISM commands here. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to run these individually. I mean, you could theoretically modify the script to run these things each at a time. But the problem is Windows is going to prompt you to do a reboot after every single one of these things. And quite frankly, I don't want to reboot after every single one of them. So I'm just going to run them individually and kill the command logic between each one of these commands. And then once it finishes, I'll reboot the system. So to do that, it's relatively simple, right? Just highlight it, and then you hit F8 on the keyboard, or you could right-click and you run selection. And you'll see it down here, run through the selection. It's going to say restart Windows to complete, so you just Control-C, and it ends the command. And then go up to the next one. It's just F8. And just Control-C. Okay, so our OS is back up, booting now. And what we're going to want to do here in this actual operating system is go back into our scripting location. Okay, so at this point we have our DISM stuff cleaned up. We have our firewall configuration done. So let's fix the UAC controllers, and then we're going to have to reboot again. So we're just going to right-click on that and do Run as Administrator. Awesome. We have a registry fix for notifications, which I'm also going to run, which will kill the majority of the Windows notifications because they're super annoying and I don't want to listen to the system just nag me constantly. And then we have a SMB fix, which we need to run, so we're just going to run this as administrator. Okay. We want to re-enable Windows updates, so we're going to run this as administrator. Great. So now at this point, we have a bunch of things that are done that need to be rebooted in order for them to take effect. So let's restart the system again. Okay, so the system's back up. Now, you're probably asking yourself, where do all these scripts exist? They exist in the configuration video for the vanilla version of Windows 10 that we tackle both the X-Lite and the Spectre 10 operating systems in a single operating system for testing purposes. So that OS configuration is where all these scripts and configurations exist. And I'll leave the link in the description as to where to go for that information. But specifically what this is just a run through to show you the differences once we add all these things to the operating systems, secure the operating systems, and then we run our Nessus scan against the system again so you could see specifically what we've done to the OS from a security perspective versus just a functionality perspective. And then at one point or another, we'll make an additional video for our X-Lite and an additional video for our Spectre system, so that way we can run through the daily use of the operating system after we make these changes. Okay, so let's get back into it. Let's go into our PC and into our directory and tools and our customizations. So at this point, we've done the firewall config. We've done the DISM command fix. We've done the UAC fix. We've done the registry notification fix. We've done the SMB fix. And we've done the Windows Update fix. Let's take a look at our service configuration. So this is our service configuration to fix the Windows services on the operating systems. And one of the ones like specifically like this crap here, there's absolutely no reason why this garbage exists in these operating systems since Edge is not part of them. But for whatever reason, they're still turned on in both OSs. So let's fix that now too. So we're just going to right click on this and do Run as Admin. But something I like to do before I do anything else is, because we saw some errors in there, let's take a look at the registry. Okay, so in the registry, what we're going to look for specifically is HKey local machine, system, current control set, services. And now, if we do a comparison of our services.bat file here and do an edit, and go back over here, we look for the CDP service. That's it. So 4 is disabled. So that's what we want to see. And let's look at the diag track. So 4 disabled. Okay, so the OS is back up and it's running. It's reconnected to the network. And at this point, what we're going to do is we're going to sit idle and allow the Nessus scan to actually scan the system. Now, post changes of our configuration, if we go into our task manager, let's see if there's any difference in our performance aspects, which I doubt that there really is. So we're at 1.3 gigs of utilized memory. We're right around the 2 to 5% utilization as far as the actual processor configuration is concerned. I will say that if we look, there's a strong possibility that we're going to see as far as memory utilization. Yeah, so that's the Defender engine. And I did locate that these operating systems appear to both, this and the X-Lite operating system for Windows 10, both contain the Defender bug in them already, which is a configuration problem in Defender itself. So while we're being scanned, let's take a look at that real quick. And specifically what we want to do is go to Settings. I'm going to go to Updates and Security, and on the left-hand side, click on Windows Security, and we're going to click on Virus Protection and Threats. And we're going to go to Manage Settings, and then we're going to look specifically. We want to disable the submission sampling and then dismiss the notification on that. We want to turn tamper protection on. That should be on, but we do want to add exclusions. And specifically, the exclusion we want to add is a folder. And where we want to go with the folder is into the C Program Files, Windows Defender, and then select the folder. And the reason why is because you don't want the Defender application scanning the Defender application while it's scanning the Defender application. It causes a loop, which causes latency, which causes the service to basically leak. So setting the service to not scan itself as a folder where the actual scanner lives is a pretty good idea, especially if you want to not have a memory leak, which is basically that as the application continues to scan itself, it just leaks and leaks and leaks and leaks and leaks until it's using 250 to 512 megs of RAM just to run the Defender application. Now, that said, our configuration obviously should have the firewall turned on. As we see, we're getting a notification for the firewall. But with the Nessus scan, I always like to run the Nessus scan without the firewall on first. And then we'll run the Nessus scan again after we create a firewall rule to allow the scan through it with the firewall turned on and see what we get for an output. So stand by while that occurs, and I will kick this video back up once we're at the point where we could check the Nessus configuration. Okay guys, so we are there. We ran our scan against our Ghost 10 operating system, 22H2. After all of our scripts that were run on the operating system, Firewall is disabled, and we came back with 11 infos. That means that our operating system is very much more secure than it was before that. Now I'm running another scan right now with the firewall turned on. We'll see what those results look like. But if we go back to our Ghost 10 22H2 configuration and we look at it, we had 38 and 1. And if we dip back into this operating system after our script configuration, we're at 11 info. So we're in much better shape on our Ghost 10 22H2 system, all things configured, post-configuration of our scripting. So these are things that I would say resolves the issues in that operating system that have to do with the firewall and then the integration services that are running that don't need to be running because the thing that they'd integrate with is missing from the operating system. Now, with all that said, as I've dug around in that operating system to see what else we could do to trim out fat to make that operating system faster, I did notice that we do have an issue with the operating system, that there is a connection issue between the Defender firewall and the Windows firewall. So in essence, the Defender firewall, even though it's enabled, isn't showing as enabled in the registry. It's disconnected. And then the Windows firewall is running on the legacy version of the Windows firewall configuration, which is pre-Windows 10. It looks like the Windows 7 configuration for the legacy firewall is adapted somehow into that operating system. Now, it works perfectly fine. It's not an issue, but you're not going to get the scan functions of the Defender antivirus through the firewall. And since that's the case, I wouldn't suggest running the Ghost 10 operating system with the Defender application. I would just install it as the compact OS without Defender and then run a third-party antivirus. just because at this point it doesn't make any sense to run that service since it's disconnected from actually scanning anything coming into the system anyway. So that's just a suggestion as far as running the operating system. If you're going to run the 22H2 version, just run the compact without the Defender option. Okay, so our firewall on scan finished, and we have 4 infos, which is good, but it's not as good as our X-Lite 10 system was on our info configuration, which means we're probably missing a config somewhere in that firewall that we just can't see because of the disconnect. Now, with that said, I did cancel it. I did get to 98.9% completed, and then I decided that was enough because what happens with the scanner is it'll get close to 100 and it'll sit there for 20 minutes, 15 minutes, idle, scanning additional things to see if there's anything else that it's missing. So it does a recheck on the system after it completes. And there's no reason, because at that point, it's already done the scan. It already gives you all the information, so the output is what it is. Generally speaking, it tries to find the critical stuff first, then the high, medium, so on and so forth. Once you get to the lows and the infos, it's going to do a recheck, but it just takes more time than it's worth to actually complete the scan. So with that said, I mean, we have 4 infos. And again, you'll see 100% on the actual scan result. And the reason why is because it 100% completed. It was just doing the recheck. So at any rate, it's still not as good as the X-Lite system. But as far as Windows 10 22H2 is concerned, after we did all the config. But with that said, it did do well. So it's much better now than it was. Okay, so where does that leave us in a Spectre 10 Ghost system? I think that if you're going to run this Ghost system, to run the 20H2 version, I'll put the link in the description to the previous video which goes over that operating system. But if you're going to run the Ghost version, run the 20H2. The 22H2, it's an upgrade that doesn't have the additional functions and features added to it. It's not trimmed down. Unfortunately, it causes a lot of issues that wouldn't be there if you just ran the vanilla version of the operating system, which at this point would be a better choice than running this operating system. Once you have all the updates applied to the system, it's not going to be any smaller than your 22H2 vanilla Windows 10 system is anyway. If you're going to run a smaller OS, I would run the X-Lite 10 system, the one that we've previously tested, or just run the vanilla version. I think at this point with this configuration on this system, we could go further with this and we could add the additional configuration to it for the updates and apply all the Windows updates. And then we could go through the configuration again and add applications and software to it. But that doesn't fix the broken portions of the operating system and the registry configuration where Defender isn't really linked to anything correctly. We have issues with the UAC controls not actually linking correctly to the OS. There's problems and bugginess in the OS to begin with on the initial installation process. Things are really slow as far as clicking on things are concerned. It's just not a well-polished OS, which is a shame because 20H2 I think was probably one of the best Windows 10 OSs that we've scanned as far as a security configuration. Hopefully you guys are enjoying these videos. Thanks for sticking around.